Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine Zoominar producer, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program, The State of Jewish Journalism. Today's session is being recorded, and the link will be available later this week. We will take some of your questions at the end of the program, so please type them in the Q&A box. Following today's program, be sure to visit Moment's website to sign up for next week's Zoominar on our Jewish Political Voices project, where we've been following 30 Jewish voters from 10 different swing states over the last year. Several of these voters will be joining us along with Lynn Sweet, Washington Bureau Chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Now for today's program. Sarah Breger is Deputy Editor of Moment Magazine and Director of the Daniel Pearl Investigative Initiative. Sarah has won numerous awards, including first place for Religion Reporting of the Year from the Religion News Association and first place for Best In-Depth News Writing on Religion from the American Academy of Religion. Philissa Cramer is the Jewish Telegraphic Agency's editor-in-chief. Prior to joining JTA in 2020, she was a founder and editor of Chalkbeat, the nonprofit news organization covering education. Philissa is a graduate of Brown University. Andrés Spokoiny is president and CEO of the Jewish Funders Network. He has served as the CEO of Federation CJA in Montreal and worked for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Community in Paris as regional director for Northeast Europe. While at JDC, he also served as the director of Latide Europe, a leadership training institute for Jewish lay and professional leaders, and directed the International Center for Community Development. Originally from Argentina, Andrés has a multidisciplinary academic background, including business, education, and rabbinical studies in different institutions from around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce Sarah Breger, Philissa Cramer, and Andrés Spokoiny.
Thanks, Suzanne. And thank you for helping put together, I think, what will be a really important conversation. Andrés and Philissa, thank you guys for making the time to join us. It's hard not to feel like journalism is currently at a critical juncture. I think the past few years have shown us how important dogged reporting can be in holding institutions more accountable. At the same time, we see studies showing that public confidence in the press continues to erode. Fake news, which was a term initially used for the made-up stories being passed along on Facebook feeds, is now a legitimate attack on any form of journalism you disagree with. The coronavirus has hastened the closures of many local newsrooms, according to Poynter 60 and counting. But with changing business models, they may have been heading that way anyway. In the Jewish world, we've seen a number of newspapers shutter, while some have stopped their print publications and are now only online, like the New York Jewish Week. But it also feels like we're at an incredibly exciting time for Jewish journalism. Jewish journalism feels more relevant than ever. Arguments and ideas being put forth in Jewish media sites are being talked about in mainstream circles via social media and other channels. And Jewish media entities are experimenting with new business models and new initiatives. And strong reporting is being done in many different outlets, both online and in print, and in new formats like audio and video. So there are obviously a lot of ways to approach this conversation, but I'd like to start with Andrés as a non-journalist who thinks a lot about Jewish journalism. What is the role of journalism in Jewish?
First of all, thank you for having me in this interesting conversation. Thank you, Suzanne, Sarah, and Philissa. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Just, I would say that the role of journalism in the Jewish communal system can't be overstated. It's critically important, and it bothers me that, you know, I wrote about this, that when we were talking at the beginning of COVID, okay, we need to save, quote unquote, save the community, we need to save the JCCs, we need to save schools. Very few people were talking about the media, about the need to save Jewish, you know, media outlets. And I think it's critically important. And it's critically important for a number of reasons. First of all, is the public square of the community. You cannot have a community if it doesn't have a place for exchange of ideas. And now, in a time of of echo chambers and polarization and extremism, we don't really have that. So if we lose media, which is probably our only public square, especially in a time when we're isolated and we're in lockdowns and whatever, so the damage is very real. The second reason why we need journalism is because we need to talk about the future of Jewish ideas. I mean, we're living in a time of enormous change in the Jewish community and in the world, right? And if you compare it to previous times in the history of the Jewish people, when there was enormous change, like the 19th century, Central Europe, there was an effervescence of articles and journals and newspapers and people debating the ideas that created the Jewish world in which we live today. Without that, we're going to have a much poorer Jewish future. And the last thing why I think why media is so important is because we need that function of sort of holding communal organizations and communal leaders accountable. And that's probably done only by media. Yes, boards of an organization are supposed to hold the leaders accountable and what have you, but in many cases, it doesn't happen. So for all these reasons and many more, the conversation about media now, it's more important than ever. And it's important now because the business model of media is in crisis for everybody. If it's in crisis for the New York Times and the Washington Post, of course it's going to be in crisis for the JTA and the Jewish Week, right? So to ask things from the Jewish media that we can't ask from the secular media, it's unfair. It's a community responsibility to quote unquote save and strengthen Jewish media as a whole. It's not just a responsibility of the publications themselves.
Philissa, I'd love to get your take on this, but also to add one wrinkle, I'm curious what the role of Jewish journalism is in more in a broader society for a general audience. You guys just launched this amazing partnership with New York Magazine, and you're publishing stories by JTA reporters on New York Mag's website. But does the role of Jewish journalism switch as your audience shifts?
You took some of the things I was going to talk about. So yes, to everything Andrés said. I think it's easy to feel alone right now, wherever you're sitting, and seeing your story reflected in broader narratives is a really powerful thing that people need. So that's something that Jewish journalism can do for the Jewish community writ large. There's also a need to explain what happens in the Jewish community to people who don't get it. That can be, Jews, it can be non-Jews. And I think we've seen some really powerful examples just in the last couple of weeks. I mean, the protests in Brooklyn are one where it's really inscrutable. It's inscrutable, honestly, if you live 2 miles away and you haven't thought about it, right? But it's getting national media attention. And I think everybody who's watching this has probably read the drop-in story. This is our national news organization. We're a really great national news organization. We're going to do one pass at this issue that's in the Jewish world, and it's never going to feel quite right. And the best people to tell those stories are the people who are embedded and have deep understanding and are experts and have deep sourcing. And those are Jewish journalists, right? So the partnership that, I don't know if we can say we launched the partnership. We had a partnership. We hope that it continues. And part of the magic of journalism right now is magic and challenge and opportunity, and all of those things is to be nimble. We saw an opportunity that what was happening in Brooklyn needed to be explained to readers, a wide array of readers, a wide array of people. And so we reached out to New York Magazine and produced kind of the definitive profile of this agitator who I predict that story will hold up for a while, and he'll be around kind of raising curiosity for a long time. I think, you know, there were other stories done about him in the last week, and some of them were by Jews and some were not. And you can really tell by Jewish journalists and some were not. And you can really tell, I think, who has that expert authority that can explain our community to the broader world. I think that is a really powerful role that Jewish journalism can play, in addition to everything else.
What's interesting is, you know, I read that story of this kind of, you know, Trumpian figure in Borough Park. And as someone with family in Borough Park, I also, you know, as I read it, I kind of covered my eyes and cringed because, you know, there's still that element as a journalist, like, does everyone need to know about our, you know, worst characters? And I think there's that question of the inside outside that exists.
It's funny because we have a story in the works about that reaction, which is another kind of power of Jewish journalism is we're not covering something else, right? We're there forever, and we're going to keep turning the angles and exploring them in a very authentic way, the way that people who are experiencing what is happening in our community are experiencing.
Yeah, I think that the question of inside out, it's an important question, and it's playing out in very, very different ways. A lot of people, for example, will tell you, I mean, in relation, for example, to the debate about Israel, I think that a lot of people say, don't publish criticism of Israel because this is used by our enemies, right? Kind of the same as what you were saying, Philissa, about, you know, you talk about this guy from Borough Park, and this is being, you know, weaponized by others. But at the end of the day, we need to have the conversations we need to have. And the anti-Semites and anti-Zionists, they don't need an excuse. They don't need the information that they will read on the JTA to attack us. I mean, nobody found the protocols in the Jewish media. They invented them. So I think that's kind of a red herring that's sometimes used to sort of drown debate and not have the conversations that we need to have. I do think that we need, of course, we need to be responsible, right? But that brings me to another problem that I see in journalism today, in Jewish journalism, and that's a problem for outlets like the JTA and Moment that try to be pluralistic and you know, objective and base themselves on journalistic standards. Is that the funding model of journalism now is that if you want to create something that is a megaphone for a very clear ideological position, you're going to have all the funding you need. Like if you want to create something that is a right-wing publication, you're gonna find, you know, you're gonna find funding for that. And the problem is that people are not going to want to fund you. People are not going to want to fund things which they don't agree 100%. And that's where the community needs the greatness to realize that it is important to fund things, even if you don't agree with them, because they are important for the community. They are important to build the fabric of the community. There's a question here about, you know, engaging and reaching out to young people. Of course, like reaching out, like media can be a vector of Jewish engagement, but to be a vector of Jewish engagement, it needs to be authentic and it needs to be pluralistic. So yes, some things for funders, and I work with funders, right? For funders, sometimes the thing is you got to be reading things in a newspaper that you fund that are going to make you cringe. But that's the rule of the game. If you want it to be vibrant and lively, you can't control it. You can make it into just a megaphone of the things you want to say.
And I think that there's models
an appetite for that? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there are models for this, right? So before coming to JTA earlier this year, I was at Chalkbeat, which covers education. And gosh, there is a lot of polarization in the education space and a lot of money flying around to advance certain arguments. And you can find, there are definitely foundations that, you know, they're supporting ideologically driven publications or spaces to advance ideas. And I think that there's it requires education and it requires evidence. But I think that funders really can come to understand that that independent journalism, it strengthens everything else that they're trying to do. That having a robust and healthy press is a piece of what makes a robust and healthy society. And yes, sometimes that's going to feel hard, but the big picture is something that is worth living with. And so I've seen that, and Andrés, I know you're doing this already, so you see it too. I've seen that people can come get there, and that it can feel attractive to say, no, we're going to pay for this thing that only says this one idea. Okay, that's going to reach the people who already think that, and it's not going to go any further. And so if you're satisfied with that, that's what you should do. But if you want to potentially, have a seat at the table of ideas, and where people are, I think people really do want to learn new things. I mean, I hope that there's all sorts of data points in our society that says that that's hard and that we are really polarized. But I don't think that's how people really are, and we can help them feel safe to be challenged and talk to people and hear from people that they wouldn't imagine they want to.
And another aspect of this is helping people understand that that different, Jewish news outlets or different, Jewish sites are perhaps being funded by different groups for various reasons. I think there's kind of a Jewish news literacy problem, just like there's a news literacy problem in media in general. People don't often understand, where their sourcing is coming from, both funding, but also just sources in general. On Saturday, I was thinking about this because, on Saturday morning, there was a tweet that went viral that Jewish News USA was reporting that Trump is thinking of resigning. Jewish News USA is not a real news outlet, and eventually Twitter, suspended them. But before that time, thousands of people shared it, commented on it. It already sort of became part of the canon of what was happening. And I think it's because people don't realize that there's no difference between, Jewish News USA and, JTA, just to, give a, another acronym.
I don't know. I don't think in that situation, anybody's thinking, is Jewish News USA a thing? Is JTA a thing? It's that we do have these spaces where there's just a flood of information and things may be true and maybe not true. And that's the condition that we're all operating in, which is a challenging one. And definitely, I think any journalist working today experiences effects of that.
It's the other side of the dark side of the democratization of access to, the internet is a very flattening force. Everything, everything comes at the same level, at the same hierarchy. So I think that, but I think that the question of literacy then becomes very important. I mean, people do know, they prefer to ignore it, but people do know that certain outlets in the secular space have standards and do proper reporting, and others don't. In the Jewish community, it's much harder to do that. But there's also another element that we didn't mention yet, but I'm sure you guys are going to get there, which is the element of the space of local Jewish journalism. That is also very. We're talking. So there's a different levels of problems here. There's a level that we have at the national level, right, with the business model of media, with those issues that you were talking about, the ideologization, the lack of literacy in media, etc. Then there's the level of what's happening with those publications that were serving a specific community that are becoming less and less relevant and less vibrant because then they can get their news from the national outlets, and B, because they were funded and fed from a system of community engagement on the local level that doesn't exist anymore, right? So, and paradoxically, we see the same in the secular space. Local news channels and local newspapers are all suffering. So I think I wonder if to address the issues of Jewish journalism, we need to look both at the local, at the national, or even international level, because you have all the Israeli newspapers in the mix too that also have news about the Jewish world. So it's more of an ecosystem with different parts.
In terms of local news, I'm curious what you guys think about kind of what's at stake if we lose, those local newspapers. We keep calling it the secular world. I don't know if it's that or mainstream media. Margaret Sullivan's new book about local news, her argument is when there's a news desert, democracy declines at, a drastic rate. Could something similar happen in the Jewish world once local Jewish news disappears, if it disappears?
I mean, local press, local reporting is, like, I'm with Margaret Sullivan. Local reporting matters. I think that there are some infrastructures in place to meet some of the needs that local news consumers have had historically. I think, if you look at a local Jewish newspaper, over time, it's got a lot of life cycle stuff. It's got movers and shakers kinds of things, like, that's all really important. That can maybe be served through social media or other ways. But real reporting really matters. And just as Andrés is saying that, funders should be held accountable, Jewish institutions should be held accountable, like, everyone benefits by having journalistic eyes on them. Really, everyone does. And that we shouldn't let that vanish locally. And I think a big question facing the ecosystem is, like, what can national or international news organizations do to support essential local reporting? This is something where also, I have a model coming from Chalkbeat, which is like, it's all the local, it's a network of local newsrooms. They're all part of the same national newsroom. So it's not like different newspapers that have been absorbed, but navigating that balance of what is the balance between telling local stories for local consumers and how are we reaching them, and how are we stitching things together to tell that big picture story about our collective condition. I think that's a balance that is worth really engaging at all times. And I think that I think we meaning national news organizations have really just started to scratch the surface of what is started to think about how can we support local newsrooms. And certainly, these questions which have been percolating, I think, long before I entered the Jewish media space, really are acute right now with the absolute disappearance of local advertising, which puts every local paper in total crisis. So yeah.
Right. Just to add to that, I think it's absolutely true that the whole economy of local journalism is a problem. But I think that we need to look at it in a broader sense. The Jewish journalism, local Jewish journalism, is also decreasing in importance because Jewish communal life takes a less important place in people's life than it used to, right? You wanted to know what happened in the Jewish organizations around you. You wanted to know who the movers and shakers are, because that was your life. As a Jew, you cared. Who was the macher in this, and who's getting married with whom, and and what's doing in this or that organization. You care less now. So it's sort of thinking again how the communities look like today, and what is the media that they need. I mean, Philissa is right. Like, do you need something that celebrates life cycle events when you actually have social media that does that well? What is the role that local journalism can play now to sort of create a synergetic, sort of positive feedback loop with the development of Jewish life in a specific city, which is different than what national Jewish journalism needs to do. National journalism should be more in the realm of discussing ideas and serving as that public square for debate. But local has a much more important connection to local communal life. You know, engagement, Jewish engagement is always local. You don't engage with something national. You engage with your own community. And Jewish journalism has to be thought as part of that engagement.
Right. I think we also miss out on this sort of geographic diversity when, you know, so many of our national media publications that are Jewish are, you know, either focused on the West Coast or the East Coast. I mean, so many people are surprised that Moment is in DC. They kind of act, how can like a Jewish magazine thrive in such an exotic locale? But I mean, we should be covering, you know, we have to cover the Midwest, we have to cover the South. I mean, Florida, you know, is incredibly important. It's going to be incredibly important in the election. And, you know, I'm not sure the best way to do it because, you know, we don't want to do just a fly in. You know, I think, you know, Philissa, you said like this drop in, which I think people tend to do.
So, and I will say I said that, and as I said that, I thought, no, I shouldn't say this because I have been in the, I believe in parachuting in. I think that that's appropriate, right? You have to be smart about it. When do you parachute in? When are you embedded? When are you committed to having a person doing sustained local reporting? And when can you drop in? But parachuting in and then surfacing out what you find, embedding it in a web of ideas and reporting from beyond, like that's good. That's that's good for locals. Like I've never understood where the criticism, like parachuting in, it, to me, conjures a rescue mission or some kind of essential support. And that is a good thing as long as it's done sensitively and respectfully and with relationship building.
Right. And with understanding of the Jewish community, you know, that exists there.
Yep.
I'm getting, I got one text, a few texts of questions, but you guys can also use the Q&A bar, feel free. But the question is, what is Jewish news? Which is, in some ways, it's a good question. There's a new, so I mean, I'll give a short answer. You know, there's this new show on Prime, on Amazon Prime, called the Jewish Inquirer, about England's fourth largest Jewish newspaper. And it's a fun show, but every episode they flash on like the headlines of the week. And it's always something like Jewish Film Festival debuts Jewish film exclusive, or Daniel Craig is not Jewish, breaking news. And I think there's sort of there's some like idea that that's what Jewish news is. And I mean, maybe there is a little bit of that, but, you know, I've always just thought about it as, you know, this is something, you know, what are we doing that our readers care about? You know, we should be answering the questions that keep our readers up at night.
I'm not gonna lie, people are searching, is Daniel Craig Jewish? That's a real thing, right? Like that is an information need that people have, and that's right. So like, but yes, that's not where things end. But I think that's real though, right? Like when you say what is Jewish news, like the reader has got to be at the center of defining that. And what readers need there is, you know, wide ranging. And what we believe they ought to read is also wide ranging. And the Venn diagram is like not a perfect circle. So I think it's a good question. And I don't know if I'm going to dodge the answer.
I mean, I think that, listen, in a different, you know, lehavdil, I have the same problem. When it goes to philanthropy, people ask me all the time, what is Jewish philanthropy, right? I work with funders, you know, and it means different things for different people. You know, you could say that, you know, Barry Weiss, that Jewish journalism in the New York Times in some way, right? Because she writes from whether you like her or you hate her, that's not the point. The point is that she claims to write from a deeply Jewish perspective, and she writes about Jewish topics and what have you. So it's on the eye of the beholder. I think that what needs to happen though, and whether that's all of Jewish journalism or a portion of it, or what you're saying, the Venn diagram, and I think that what needs to happen is a meaningful conversation about what does it mean to be Jewish today. I think that is missing in my view, or we're touching the surface of it. yes, it's interesting to have yet another discussion about whether Jews are white or not. But let's go a little deeper than that. Let's talk about, what are the yearnings, the spiritual, aspirations of Jews in the 21st century? How is Judaism going to respond to the spiritual challenges of the pandemic? Like that kind of stuff. Of course, people want to know if Daniel Craig is Jewish. By the way, I want to know if Daniel Craig is Jewish too. But it shouldn't stop there. I think it should be. I think we don't have to be afraid in engaging with deep controversial Jewish ideas. And by controversial, I don't mean political. I mean sort of issues of what does it mean to be a people today? What does it mean to be a community? I think that if we're making a disservice, we're doing a disservice to the community if we don't address those questions. So call that Jewish journalism or call that, Judaism, talking about Judaism, whatever you want to call it. I think it's important to have that.
And the question is, can we hear from voices from people who may not necessarily be reading the Jewish press? I think sometimes, we often kind of report on ourselves and we're all kind of in this circle of writing about ourselves. And then, people talk about what we write about, but, there is a whole group of people out there who, the Jewish press is not, on their mind 24/7. And, we need to figure out a way to engage them and serve them because, I want to know what it means for them to be Jewish today.
Yeah, so if I can react to that, I think that you can have the two extremes. So an outlet for a small group of people that care deeply about something, it's gonna follow you and it's gonna read you. So for example, you have an outlet like Jewish Philanthropy, it's gonna be good, but people are going to follow it because it's for people that are hyper connected. And then people are going to read Barry Weiss in the New York Times, right? So these two extremes, the very loosely affiliated and the very affiliated.
Uh-oh. Just as he was making such his dramatic.
Oh no, I wanted to know. I
wanted to hear the end of that sentence.
Yeah. While we wait for Andrés to return, I guess I will not respond directly to what he was saying. I'm not sure what it was going to be, but I was going to, to your question, I think that a lot of that has to do with distribution and about coming to terms with the fact that we want to build a loyal readership on our own. That's really important. We're doing it. We know that we can do it a lot more. We also know that there are people who will benefit from reporting produced by Jewish journalists who are not going to be daily consumers of Jewish news, and that's okay too, right? Like we want to give them the opportunity to become that. And if
sorry for that, my computer just died.
Oh, it's okay.
Apologies.
I will finish my thought and then we'll go back to what you were saying because we all wanted to hear it. But anyway, I think that partnerships and outreach beyond our historical distribution pathways are really important to recognizing that broader audience of people who are interested and will benefit from Jewish news, but may not make sense to think of them as the ultimate destination on their readership journey. It should be daily newsletter subscriber.
Andrés, do you want to finish?
I had said the most important piece of it.
And just
some of the beauties of the Zoom Live. You could
exactly. You get to see everyone's sort of house, and then also
how it crashes.
Exactly. I see there's a bunch of questions, but one thing I wanted to touch on was funding, which we've kind of alluded to. It's sort of been a thread. What are some of the innovative funding models you guys see happening that you think could be successful in the future?
So be totally honest, I'm not an expert on funding models of journalism. Frankly, I don't know. I don't think anybody is. I think everybody's wrestling with the same question: how do you fund journalism? I think one of the models that we see is something that we discussed. That is a model we don't like. It's like you're highly ideological. You're going to fund an outlet that responds exactly to what you wanna say. That is one model, and frankly, those outlets are very successful. I mean, they are successful in the sense that they don't have financial problems. They have powerful backers and that. I think that I think that when you get to other sort of more pluralistic outlets, you have a problem. And I think that there are some models that are being tested in the secular world, like the American Journalism Project, where all the notion of nonprofit journalism, the idea of public models, going back to sort of a PBS style of NPR kind of model, could be interesting. There is another way of funding media, which is through impact investing, through sort of commercial investments that are.
Oh, we lost your sound.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that agree to work at a much lower rate of return, right? I think that's that could exist and could be good. But I think it's a question of trial and error. We need to not to be afraid of trying different models of funding journalism that work in this new environment. And we're not going to get it the first time. I mean, the way of funding journalism that we know today mutated and changed a lot, from a subscription-based, from advertising-based to whatever it's going to be in the future. But it didn't come out one day completely formed.
Yeah, and I would just say that the American Journalism Project is something that was launched by co-founder at Chalkbeat, Elizabeth Green. So she's brilliant on this, and I think there's we're only just kind of realizing what can be done if we make the case really in a compelling way that basically the journalism needs an endowment, and that philanthropy is the future. It's not a poor substitute for a business model that we need to figure out how to come back to. It's what's going to allow an independent press to thrive. I'm also interested in the impact of that. I think Andrés is right that we have to try things. We have to be open to the possibility that it might not work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that journalism is unsupportable. It means we haven't figured out the way yet.
And I think COVID-19, in some ways, obviously decimated a lot of newsrooms, but it also showed us, how nimble people can be and how quick on their feet, outlets can be. I was amazed, starting in March, everyone was working from home, but everyone was still producing, this amazing journalism, and also changing their models, changing to, Zoominars or, podcasts or things like that. So in some ways, I think we've just seen how, new models can grow sometimes because of a crisis, but it's definitely out there.
But COVID also, we have to be careful with something. I mean, it's a good thing, but it's still tricky. COVID created a revolution in quality, because what happens is that let's put it this way, for Jewish education, I'm not dependent anymore on the shul of my neighborhood. I have access to the best content in the world for free via Zoom, and you don't unscramble those eggs. Meaning, people are going to be expected a higher level of quality than they were before the pandemic, precisely because of Zoom. So I think it's going to be healthy, but it's going to be more competition. Going back to local and national, local reporting, in order to compete with what people got used to in this kind of Zoominars, for example, will need to really up their game. And if they don't, they're just simply going to lose gonna lose out. So I think we need to. All these conversations are going to be more relevant, and the question of quality of content is going to be critical, I think.
I think that's right. I think it's a little overstating the case. And I think about what we saw at the High Holidays with Schultz, right? Like, everyone in the world could have gone to the most highly produced with the best singers, and they didn't, because they want to be with their community. So, and then there were lots of people who said, okay, for Kol Nidre, I'm going to hear the world's best singer. And on Yom Kippur morning, I want to hear my shul's rabbi sermon. And I think that reflects a reality that we are going to enter. And what I think that means is, like, in the ideal world, there's going to be some coordination or collaboration, or at least, something between those two. Same in Jewish journalism, we just have to figure out how to do it. And I apologize for the sounds in my home. I noticed that my mom is on this Zoominar, so I will assure you that everything is okay, but there's some kind of child situation happening. If you can all hear it, I just apologize for that.
We could not even tell, but
okay, fine. So someone lost a tooth they weren't expecting to. I don't know whether it's because they didn't notice it was loose or some kind of tragedy, but I'll find out in 20 minutes.
Well, let's move to questions, because I know if we're going to end at 5:30. It looks like we have a bunch.
We do. And actually, we have quite a few asking about younger readers. And I would assume, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, that younger Jews do not consume Jewish media the way that their parents and grandparents did. Is that the case? And so I will take all of these other questions, and we'll use one question from somebody who said, a lot of Jewish press is designed to be niche rather than broad, from our Federation periodicals to many Orthodox newspapers to Israel advocacy publications. Are there advantages to developing loyalty internally, but in limited audiences? And then it goes to the question of somebody else asking, how do we reach the various generations?
I don't think it's niche. You have to have heard that scream. Right? Like, the questions that we're engaged in are not niche. Who are we? How do we get along in this world? What is our future? Like, those are big questions. And yes, some of the distribution channels for engaging with those questions are niche. But I think I think that's limiting to imagine that way. And I don't know, that's where my gut reacts. I do think that, like, yeah, to answer your question, Suzanne, like, or the question you posed, readers in their 20s and 30s are not engaging the way their parents did. But, like, what were their parents really doing when they were 20s and 30s? Were they, like, I don't know, maybe they were not also subscribing to the Jewish newspaper. Maybe they were. I think that there's wide interest in every age group, in every demographic, in reporting and perspectives that challenge and reinforce and explore these big questions of who we are. So I feel like it's a tactical question, not a existential one.
I disagree a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit disagree. I think that we see a situation in which small cohesive communities, like the ultra-Orthodox, like as I was saying before about the Jewish Philanthropy, the collective of Jewish community professionals, these people do build loyalty, and these people have a direct utility in, like, there's a usefulness in the information they see in the Jewish media, right? If you're part of this little world of Jewish communal professionals, you kind of need to read that, because you need to know what's going on, because you need it for your work. If you're part of a Haredi community, in a small community, you need to be, updated about certain things, because your lifestyle is kind of very linked to those things. So in that sense, those niche publications are, have it easy in a way. but they're niche. In other words, they don't serve the whole ecosystem of people that need to actually deal with the questions that Philissa is talking about, like who are we and how do we live and how do we interact with one another and with the world. Those are important questions, and those are questions that the niche publications don't necessarily address for a large population, because by definition they are niche. They talk to themselves. In terms of young and of different generations, I'm not sure. When I was growing up, the young people read, I grew up in Buenos Aires. The old people read the Yiddish newspaper, and we read the Spanish newspaper, the Jewish newspaper. And the Spanish newspaper was very different. It was radical. It was against the government. It was, and we had our own outlet. I think that we don't. I'm not sure we have that today. I'm sure, and I don't know where a rebellious young Jew can read. I think I think that's a problem. But it goes back to the point of, I don't think it has to do with being young or old. I think it has to do with the vibrancy of the content and what is being discussed out there. If you're going to be talking about things that are relevant for young people are going to show up. If you're not, so people are not going to show up. But the same goes for every age group, right? Like the question of relevance, I think it's a key question of Jewish journalism now. It's not just about talking in a young language, which is part of the issue too. In this example I just gave, it's very radical. Like one was talking in a language that the young people didn't speak, which was Yiddish. But it's more than that. Is about having authenticity and relevance at the same time. And I think that's a fight that we all have. It's, by the way, it's not just media. It's every program in the Jewish community confronts the same problem.
Yeah, I really agree with that. If anyone on staff is listening, it drives me kind of bananas whenever we talk about, how do we reach 20-year-olds? How do we reach, 30-year-olds? I really think, quality is key. And 20-year-olds want to read really good narrative journalism. And I'm not really and it's sort of odd to kind of think of them as this weird little, bubble who doesn't understand the importance of journalism unless we put an emoji in front of it. But maybe I'm saying that as a millennial and I'm very defensive. I'm not sure. But, to me, I think, if you write good journalism, people are going to read it.
Thank you.
And that's core to everything. Quality is the most important thing, and impact orientation is essential. Give it if there's no there, then there's nothing for people to come to. So everything has to start with that.
Right. Thank you. Do Jewish values play a role in Jewish journalism?
They should. I think that is the question. I think that the question is important for everything that we do in the Jewish community. What makes it Jewish, right? Is Jewish journalism going to be different in the content on the one hand, but in the way we're doing journalism? So, for example, should a Jewish publication engage in something akin to Lashon Hara, in order to how you call this in English, to sort of gossiping or things like that? No, it's very popular. It sells, but should we? If we really want to be value based, that's a problem. The problem is that also Jewish values are also in the eye of the beholder. Some people will defend very different things with the excuse of, with the backing of Jewish values, right? Jewish values are very diverse, and they generally in conflict with one another. So I think that yes, Jewish journalism should reflect values, but we also should discuss what are those values, and you should be how you call it, very explicit about it.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a tough question. In some ways there maybe needs to be some sort of like Jewish journalism, ethics guidebook to exist in the world. Because it's hard to know, like on the one hand, we have our, journalism values, and, I can hear my, journalism professors telling me, publish, publish, publish. And then on the other side, I think about, my family and my community, and, if I'm doing things that, are serving them, or making them proud. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's a tough question that I think deserves real thought.
I don't know that I have that much to add, except that I think that, we saw a really searing example in the last week of the way that the idea that Jewish values can be weaponized to suppress scrutiny or silence. And so I think that exactly what Andrés said, like, what are the values that we are seeking to embody? And I think that there are some that are, like, I don't think anybody can contest, I'm sure someone could contest them, of, we believe that the Jewish people should be safe and strong, and that journalism can play a role in that. Like, that feels like a value that I don't feel like I'm in conflict with the values of journalism to say that that's like an underlying belief of Jewish journalism that might set us apart from journalism at large. And then within that, yes, all values can be debated. And that debate, I think, is part of what makes us a healthy news and media ecosystem.
Thank you. A few people have asked about reporting on anti-Semitism. Should Jewish journalism be responding to and reporting on all of it, or be proactive? And another person would like to know if your readership goes up during periods of anti-Semitism or spikes in anti-Semitism.
If I
Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oops, go ahead. I'm sure you want. Yes, I mean, people are interested in anything that is of the moment. So too often that is it. But I think that there's there are lots of people who are chronicling anti-Semitism in the world, some of whom are doing it journalistically and some of whom are doing it with a different method. And I think that's an important question, right? What is the journalistic method here? And how can we make sure that we are adding value that wouldn't be captured in a world without journalism? So that's one thing I think about. But Andrés, I want to hear what you have to say. Sorry to cut you off.
I'm biased on this question, because I think that, like, yes, on the one hand, if there is Jewish, I mean, if anti-Semitism drives more readership, so let's use it, of course, quote unquote, let's use it. But but this question has two sides. The question is, should we do something different as Jewish media because of anti-Semitism? In other words, should we do or don't do things to sort of fight anti-Semitism in the society? And for me, the answer to that is no. I think that the role of Jewish media is not to convince anti-Semites. Anti-Semites are not convincible. It's not a rational argument you have with them. So I think that the question there is, in the face of anti-Semitism, how do you help and support the Jewish community, rather than how do you worry about what the anti-Semites are gonna do or read? Because there's no dialogue possible with an anti-Semite, but there is the impact that anti-Semitism has on the Jewish community. And I think that the question then is, how does media create an environment in which being Jewish is seen as positive, as joyful, as a happy and meaningful thing, rather than something that people hate you for it? So I think that's the main role of Jewish media in the face of anti-Semitism. I don't think it's to fight anti-Semitism, because frankly, and this is for another conversation, I don't think we actually can fight anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism ebbs and flows of its own accord, and it's linked to phenomena in the society. We can protect ourselves, of course, but that's different than trying to change the hearts and minds of the anti-Semites. And I don't think we should spend a dime on that. I think we should, yes, in the face of bad messages about Jews from the outside, we should reinforce the positive messages for ourselves, so that ourselves and our and younger generations feel good and positive about being Jewish.
I think there is something in this moment, though, where explanatory reporting about anti-Semitism is really powerful. And does it stop anti-Semitism in the world? Like, no. But I think that we see this all the time, right? The dog whistles that are out there. I think by making those transparent, that is a powerful message for people who may not understand them as dog whistles, but may actually prefer not to, use them. And I think with the speed of retweets and hot takes, I do think that like some of what we see and feel may be inadvertent or uninformed, and we can play a role in doing that. So I am a little more hopeful than you, Andrés, but I think what you're saying is still true, which is that the main role of Jewish journalism is to talk about Jews and not anti-Semites.
That actually goes to the next question of how does social media affect Jewish journalism?
Gives us stuff to write about.
I mean, it affects everything. It affects how we eat, how we vote, how we relate to one another. So of course it's going to affect journalism. It's going to affect journalism even more. But I do think, and this could be the topic of an entire different conversation, right? But I do think what I would say is this, and link it to the beginning of this conversation. Social media makes makes the public square vanish, because social media allows you to customize content based on your previous choices, which means that it works on the polarization and the division of society. Thanks to social media, you have in this country people that are not just reading different stuff, they live in a different reality completely. Like there are people in this country that live in complete different universes than their neighbors, and the same is happening in the Jewish community. So I think that if anything, social media as a tool can be used by journalism. In other words, yes, use whatever social media app you can to increase readership, all that. I mean, in other words, the instrumental use of social media to make journalism more relevant, kol hakavod, go for it. But I think that the values of social media is something that we need to shine a light on and debate. Social media is first and foremost a business designed to help companies make the biggest profit possible, right? So we need to be aware of that, and we need to know that when we use social media, we are buying into a set of values that are designed to maximize profit for a number of companies, right? So that conversation needs to happen on Jewish media. In other words, that showing the values that we're living with should be a conversation for Jewish journalism to have, to educate the public about what are we doing when we're clicking on ads on social media or when we're viralizing things. We're just basically monetizing our attention for somebody else to make a profit on it, right? So that's a conversation that Jews should have, Jews more than anybody else, because we're the victims of much of the stuff that is circulating on social media.
I have to disagree a teeny bit. I mean, I agree with most of what you were saying, sorry. But But I do think, I mean, I could just speak personally, like in some ways, social media has opened my worldview, has introduced me to a lot of new people who I wouldn't have interacted with before. I think, you know, especially in journalism, sometimes when we're trying to get quotes, we often just go to like the person we know who's going to pick up the phone, who's always been quoted in every article. You know, now I see like there's so many interesting new Jewish voices out there that exist that I don't know if I would have been connected to, that now I'm connected to through, you know, Twitter and Facebook. And I mean, they come with all the baggage that you mentioned, but I think the way that it helps diverse voices get a bigger platform is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the things, right? It's a connector, it's a tool for distribution, it's a tool for amplifying anti-Semitism, it's a tool to you know, consolidate wealth. Like all of those things are true, and I think just being open-eyed about it and what can we use it for, and also let's not build our whole strategy around it because it's not going to stay this way. You know, we think about social all the time, but I think it's, you know, we shouldn't over ascribe its significance.
Thank you all. Unfortunately, our time has come to an
Oh,
end,
wow.
but I do want to leave folks with you answering one more question. With all the news that's out there today, it's hard to cover it all, but is there an important Jewish story that is not being covered today that people should know about? Someone like to start?
Yes,
Philissa,
definitely. I should go first. I mean, I would say that I don't know about not being covered, but I think I constantly am reflecting on in the kind of barrage of news and like actual like decisions and changes every single day. One thing that gets, I think, a short shrift is religion and the way that Jews practice Judaism, which is extremely dynamic and interesting, and there are really robust conversations happening. And, you know, when we look back over time, like that's going to be something that I want us at JTA to make sure that that's a piece of what we're covering, because that's to tell the Jewish story and leave that out, which is really easy to do in the day to day. You're not telling the whole Jewish story.
Great.
And I kind of agree. I think that what's absent, I mean, it's not a story, but I think that what's absent is a debate of ideas. So when I talk about ideas, I'm not talking about politics, or I'm talking about deep ideas like theology. We haven't had a theological debate in the Jewish community in the last 100 years since Mordechai Kaplan. We don't have, you know, sort of philosophical debates in the Jewish community. And when I say philosophical, I'm not talking about, you know, pies in the sky. I'm talking about, you know, really what are the ideas that undergird Jewish life, right? Kind of, I'm missing the kind of intellectual effervescence that sort of existed in Germany at the turn of the 19th century, of the 20th century, when people were debating how to be Jewish, you know, and they were debating that with knowledge and with passion, and I don't think that exists, and that doesn't exist in part because we're largely, as a community, we're largely ignorant, but also because we are afraid of having those conversations. And maybe media and you know, Moment does that. Moment did have a whole supplement about what do people think about God. I think we need much more about that. What do we think about God? What do we think about Zionism? What do we think about nationalism? You know, like those kind of stories, I think they were afraid of them. We think that people find them boring, but I think that people are in a spiritual quest. And after COVID, they're going to be even more in a spiritual quest. And we need to find a way of talking about that with them.
Thank you. Sarah, I'll give you the last word.
Sure. I mean, just something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm not really sure the best way to cover it is, you know, there's so many stories about how, you know, faith and how Judaism is going to change after COVID-19. But, you know, I don't know if we've really grappled with all the people that we've lost, you know, through the pandemic, all the Jewish lives that we've lost. And, you know, I feel like I see different media outlets have tried to approach it in some way. But, you know, there is this kind of hole, like so many communities have been decimated. And, we aren't really talking about that, or aren't really talking about that grief that exists. So I wish there was some project that was working on that.
Okay.
You
Well-
should read the story I posted right before we came here. It's all about that.
Well,
And about somebody who's working on that. So go to JTA.
Yeah. So I want to thank Andrés, Philissa, Sarah for this wonderful conversation. As Philissa said, go to JTA and read those stories. Subscribe to Moment Magazine. Embrace your local Jewish newspaper and other publications. If you've enjoyed today's program, we ask you also go to Moment Magazine and make a donation so that we can continue providing great programming like this. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we hope to see you next week when we talk about our Jewish Political Voices project. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.